So good morning. I'd like to thank you all for coming. My name is Andrew Mertha, and I'm the director of the China program here at SAIS. It is truly my privilege to introduce our speaker this morning, Professor Yan Xuetong. Professor Yan is the director of the Institute of International Studies at Tsinghua University. He's also vice chairman of the China Association of International Relations Studies and of the China Association of American Studies, and is a board member on a number of other organizations and advisor on a number of scholarly journal boards, too numerous to mention here. Professor Yan has also taught at the National Defense University, the Monterey Institute of International Studies, the Georgia Institute of Technology, Jinan University, Peking University, and is a senior research fellow at the National Security Committee and holds a number of other appointments. He is the author, co-author, and editor of a dizzying number of books that span a broad range of topics and approaches to international relations, a few of which include Moral Realism and Strategy for China's Rise, Inertia of History, China and the World in the Next 10 Years, and Ancient Chinese Thought, Modern Chinese Power. Professor Yan has also published more than 100 papers, articles, and opinion pieces on international relations. In addition to his scholarship, Professor Yan is an extremely important and influential public intellectual, one who is instrumental within the ongoing discourse on international relations, and in particular, US-China relations, during this challenging time in which we find ourselves today. A native of Tianjin, Dr. Yan received his PhD in political science from the University of California, Berkeley in 1992, an MA in international relations from the Institute of International Relations in 1986, and a BA in English from Heilongjiang University in 1982. His most recent book is Leadership and the Rise of Great Powers, which was published this year from Princeton University Press. Just as a housekeeping note, Professor Yan will give his remarks, and then he and I will sit and I will moderate the question and answer session, which will go until about 11:15. So without any further delay, please join me in welcoming Professor Yan Xuetong.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Mertha, for your very nice introduction about today. I think I'm supposed to talking about the competition between China and the US and its impact on international order. Actually, last 2 days, we have already discussed with several institutions about this issue. So here, and I think today, maybe we can talk more theoretically rather than only focus on the policy. Well, first, I think people really want to understand how to define the current China-US relations. It's a competition or rivalry or the confrontation or enemies. And now, through the last 2 days of discussion, I find no American counterparts and like to use the term enemy to describe our relationship. And no matter from Pentagon, from State Department, anywhere, and they emphasize that, okay, we are competitors instead of enemies. Well, I think competitors is quite positive. And first, and the competition is so prevailing among the human being relations. So the companies compete each other every day. So generally speaking, the competition will drive the world moving forward. So if China and the US really treat each other as competitors and the relationship as a competition, from my personal view, I think it's okay. It's not that negative. And the second thing is very important, and it's about what the impact of our competition will have on the international order. So before we know the impact, we need to have a definition about the order or international order. My definition for international order is a little bit different from the concept world order, because world order including the domestic politics and including the domestic peace in all of the nation states. International order only refers to the relationship among the nation states. That means ignore the domestic situation. So my definition for the international order means that the nation states settle down the interest of conflicts according to international norms or existing norms peacefully. So that means the international order refers to a state in which the countries compete with each other or have even a rivalry against each other, but they agree with each other. Okay, let's just like all the table tennis players, all the boxing players, and we compete under some rules. And from my understanding, if we have a competition like the soccer, and people will feel, oh, it's okay, not that violent. But if like a boxing match, people say, this is dangerous, right? So anyhow, from my understanding, if the settlement is peaceful, no matter what kind of conflicts we have, from my understanding, that refers to the state of order. That's we have order. So that's why when we're talking about international order, we're always concerned the danger of war. If war occurred, if military clashes happen, and we think the order will be totally destroyed, right? So from this perspective, I think first, I would argue that it will be impossible for a human being to avoid conflicts. Where human beings are so selfish, and all of the nation players, nation states, are driven by the self-interest. The foreign policy and serves their own national interests, because their national interests can never be shared, can never always be shared, and always something different. So the conflicts is inevitable. Mainly because first is human beings' nature are selfish. Second is a character of international system. The basic character of international system is anarchy. In an anarchical system, it's difficult to maintain the order, not like the hierarchical system. That means it's difficult to maintain the relations between the nations, and more difficult to maintain the peaceful relations among nations than maintain the peaceful relations among the universities, right? So here, because the universities actually state in a hierarchical system, it's not that difficult to maintain the peaceful relationship among them. But in the anarchical system, it's very difficult, because in the anarchical system, the nations and possess the military capability. That means they possess the tools and for purchasing their interests with through the approach of violence. That's the problem. So in that way, and in this anarchical system, if we want to maintain order, the first thing we have to do is that we should concern how to prevent the military solution. As long as we can prevent a military solution and we can achieve the purpose to have all conflicts settled down and peacefully, right? Okay, now how about the competition between China and the US? My understanding, currently, people feel the international order becomes uncertain, like what we experienced during the last 20 years, and mainly after the Cold War. And from my understanding, there's several reasons, but some of them more important than the others. First is the change of international configuration or the power structure. After the Cold War, US became the only superpower. The sole superpower position makes US offer a leadership for the world. And this leadership, and from my understanding, plays a positive role and make the world order relatively peaceful or more peaceful than the situation during the Cold War. Well, now we get used to that situation. Now we feel that, hey, seems to me Americans' leadership can no longer play that kind of a role. The function is undermined. From understanding, first, at least the current, the present American government, and have less interest to continue provide that kind of global leadership. And Trump's administration seems to try to shift off the global leadership. And the U.S. no longer want to play the role as the world police. And why? The other reason is that the world is in the process of transferring from the unipolar system to a bipolar system. That means in this period and of the transition, and the international power will redistribute it. So the redistribution of the international power create of some uncertainty. And so these make people feel the general character of the current world, the world international order is uncertain. I think these are two factors. First, the U.S. becomes reluctant to provide leadership. And second, is because during the transition period, it's a process of the redistribution of power. So these two factors make the uncertainty further. Then we can divide it or analyze the impact of China-U.S. competition on the international order in different fields. My understanding, the world international order is a comprehensive concept for everything. But then in different domains, economic sector, security sector, and the political sector, and these different sectors and get different impacts from the competition between China and the U.S. First, certainly what we concern most is the security order, right? In terms of security order, I think the most positive factor or elements is the nuclear weapons. And in the early period of the Cold War, human beings have no idea the political function of nuclear weapons. And during the 1950s and even 60s, people still, it's possible for any country to win the war with the nuclear weapons. So in that time, we prepare for what? The Third World War. There's many books about that, right? Talking about the Third World War is coming. But in the later part of the Cold War, people get more knowledge, understand the political function of nuclear weapons. The nuclear weapons can prevent direct war from the major powers. That means nuclear weapons will help a human being to prevent the major war, like World War I or World War II. And today, it seems to me, and the nuclear weapons possibly can have play more role in preventing wars, and even the small nuclear powers and have less chance to involve into war against the big nuclear powers like U.S. and North Korea. So nowadays, the people feel that, hey, nuclear weapons make the world safe, and we do not need to worry about the danger, the possibility of, do not need to worry about the major war, and because of the nuclear powers and the major powers, and do not want to sacrifice themselves, committed suicides during the nuclear war. And second, not only the major war actually constrained by the nuclear weapons, and also the new age makes the proxy war becomes less necessary. That means that in the age of the digital age, the proxy war becomes less efficient to achieve the strategic goal of the major powers. Neither China nor U.S. can benefit very much from the proxy war. During the Cold War, why U.S. and Soviet Union so favorable for carrying out proxy war? Because they use the through the proxy war, they can change the country's regime to help the government, to help a political group have the similar ideology and to hold the power in that country. If the government, the local government in the other countries have the similar ideology, you will have the chance to access or even control that country's natural resources. But now the world has already changed. That means in the digital age, then you find that you do not need to establish a government with a shared ideology with you. And as long as they have economic interests shared with you, they will take sides with you. So that means you don't need to control the government. You do not need to control the resources. You just need what? You need to have a better technology and a cheaper technology. And then you can obtain their market. And this age is so different. And you find that the digital economy has already accounted for more than 50% of US GDP. And it's getting closer to 40% of Chinese GDP. What does it mean? It means no matter what kind of international national leaders, as long as they concern their national wealth, they will concern, hey, we must have some upper hand in this sector, because digital economy generates most wealth of the nation. How can you make it? So the competition is not to control the natural resources, but what? How to use the digital resources. This is really something very new to human being. Data becomes a kind of a resources of wealth and capability. No, a kind of a power. But the question is that how much data you possess, how much data you can control. The question is, the key issue is that what capability you have to explore the data, how much you can use the data. And the data is different from the natural resources. Data is a kind of resources. The more you use, the more you have. Opposite from the natural resources. Natural resources, the more you use, and less left. So in that way, the competition changed. Now, use my word. Now, even so the competition is so different from a traditional geopolitics. Now, geopolitical competition means you compete on a flat board. So the Brzezinski and have a book and have the chessboard, right? A chessboard. Chessboard, they see the concept on the chessboard means the competition on the flat surface of the Earth. And when we have a satellite, this is no longer 2 dimensions competition. It's already 3 dimensions competition. It's a cubic competition. Now, when we have the cyber system, internet, then there's a 4-dimension competition. And a lot of traditional, natural geopolitical obstacles can no longer constrain major powers' behavior or their action. They can easily overcome this geographic difficulties. So you see, and they can attack the others' power station through the internet instead of recruit the troops to that country and then launch an attack against their power station. They do not need to. So this makes even the security is changed, right? And especially, all of the major powers found that the most urgent security issue is not your border. It's not the geographic border. It's not your so-called traditional geopolitical interests. It's what? It's a cybersecurity. How can protect the threat from the internet, the cyber system? And these heavily rely on what? Rely on your cyber technology. It's not rely on the troops, and based on the technological invention. So this means in this age, the competition between China and the US will have a more impact on the cyber competition, cyber security, rather than the border or this traditional geopolitical sovereignty. It's different. Now, the sovereignty is still important. That's why you find that and China and the US have a big debate about the cyber sovereignty. And they're talking about the principle. What kind of principle we need to govern the cyber? And free flow or security? Which one should have the first priority? And President Obama wants that. And the cyber world is still in the primitive age. There's no any substantial norms to govern major powers' behavior or the policy action in the cyber world. So my understanding that we will see more and more and competition and intense relation between China and the U.S. in terms of the cyber world. Second, what's the impact of China-U.S. competition on the economic order of the world? First, we find that usually we regarded the economic relationship as the cornerstone or blackest stone for China-U.S. relationship. So in early 1990s, just after World War II, whenever China faced a problem with the Congress about the most favorite national treatment, and then Chinese ambassador and Li Daoyu always contact with the American economic giants and tell this first two largest companies, hey, talk to your president, you have interest in China. Now this no longer works. You can no longer expect economic cooperation, economic relationship, economic business to play the role to stabilize China-U.S. relations. And the economic relations is become the source of the conflicts instead of the solution of the conflicts. It's a change. Yesterday, we had a discussion with the people at the Pentagon, and we usually we regard the mule-to-mule relationship is always a trouble, and between China and U.S. relationship. Now, China and the U.S. talking about, hey, how can, when our economic relationship becomes so bad, and the mule-to-mule relationship looks better, looks as can play the function to stabilize the relationship. And suddenly both sides, hey, military people are very rational. Military people are only focused on the small things, the operational things, so they do not care about the ideology. What this is becomes a positive actor. My understanding, this is a very important change. That means the competition between China and the U.S. will for some time, maybe 10, maybe 20 years, heavily focus on economic area instead of the other sectors. So economic competition, at least we see now, first we didn't have any military war or political war or ideological war. What do we have? We have a trade war. So this indicator and the economic competition will become the most harmful thing to China-U.S. relations. Unfortunately, that's my personal view. I don't think the trade war can be ended by signing a treaty through the negotiation. Even China and the US reach any agreement, so-called the first stage agreements, it doesn't mean that the trade war ended. And then still the sanctions is there, and still there's some decoupling policy there, and so that you will find that, and the economic still a major troubles for China and the US negotiate about. Instead of they talking about the South China Sea and Taiwan issue, and the other things still there, but not so urgently as the trade issue. Actually, among the trade issue, it's also because we are getting into a new age and the digital age, and the digital economy makes this economical trouble is heavily focused on the technology. So even China and the US can reach any agreement, even get a package, and totally settle down the trade problem. They cannot solve the problem on technology conflicts, technology competition. That's why, and President Trump has clearly stated, okay, Huawei and the technology problem is not on the list of negotiation. That's an independent issue. We were not talking about it. That means that today, even there's no any concern to have a kind of a dialogue or negotiation about the technology competition. So that's why the 5G become the key issue. That's why Meng Wanzhou was retained in Canada, cannot get home. That's also why, and Mr. Pompeo traveled all over the allies and persuade them to block Huawei's 5G. Okay, so you see, the economic competition becomes a major part of these two gens, and then among this, all of these economic conflicts, the technology competition is a major issue. What's the impact on the other countries? My understanding, and because the China and the US compete in the economic domain, so what kind of new international norms we should establish to govern the economic competition becomes a very, very crucial. That's reflecting as the debate about how to reform the WTO. By now, my understanding, the view for reform of the WTO is totally opposite. And there's a very little chance to have the major economies to agree with each other. It's a very difficult. So my understanding, in the future, we will see. There's a more debate, discussion, and research, and even the reports about the economic norm, the norms govern economic issues rather than arms control. Arms control usually is the major debate and target for scholars to do research and during the Cold War. But now you find that the people will spend more time to discuss and doing research and even debate about is the economic norms. Okay, so among these economic issues, especially the technology competition, we find that the American government did not officially use the term decoupling. But then, from the Chinese perspective, we feel decoupling is already a kind of a practicing policy. The government didn't use the term, but they already practice in that way. For instance, and at the university, and they already, some Chinese students cannot get the visa to study at the so-called sensitive discipline. That means high-tech disciplines. And there's a serious concern how to prevent Chinese students and to learn the advanced technology in the US and then bring them back to China and to help China to improve its technology advantage or the superiority. And besides this, and also a lot of the other things. And nowadays, my understanding, on the list of the negotiation is the peer property protection, the property rights, PR. And so that's American worry about this technology transfer to China and to help the Chinese the technology to improve too fast. So President Trump even called on American company to get out of China, and also have a concern. I don't know whether they can do it, but at least they said threatened to keep Chinese companies from the Wall Street stock market. And so this kind of a decoupling policy, from my understanding, is already practiced. But a positive thing, just the last 2 days, we heard that, and the American government firmly defining that U.S. have no intention to decouple with China. And we have Pentagon people, and the first time attended Xiangshan dialogue, and said that Pentagon have no intention to decouple with the PLA. And then 2 days later, we heard that Vice President Pence said that now decoupling is not this government's policy. So there's some change. But actually, at the Chinese side, we don't believe it. We say, okay, they're talking nice, but they won't doing things like that. But at least it means that at the American side already considering that it's impossible to have a comprehensive and full around decoupling. My personal view, I think a selective decoupling will continue. Not all the fields, not everything, not like the Cold War, there's no any contact between Soviet Union and the US, but then some area, some fields, and there will be decoupled. So this is what's this policy have impact on the economic order? My understanding, the competition about economic norms will heavily focus on what? The standard of technology, especially the standard of telecommunication technology. So that's why, and even Guterres, the UN Secretary, said at the ceremony of the 71st UN Conference, it's possible we are going to have two worlds, and each of these two countries have their own 5G system. And the other countries will be forced to take sides between the two countries. And you take you use the Chinese 5G or use the Americans 5G. And nowadays, the Li Xianlong, the president, the Singapore president said, now China and the US should not compete in that way. And you force us to taking side. We don't like it. I think most of the lesser states don't like this situation to take sides between the two countries. But unfortunately, I think it's inevitable. And just like what? Just like we see, and no one likes the competition between the Boeing and the Airbus, because we have no other choice. You don't have the third supplier. You have to make choice which company you choose to buy to purchase the commercial airplanes. But then what? You find that the states becomes clever. And okay, they said, we buy this type of flight, airplane from the Boeing. We buy that type of airplane from the Boeing. So now you find most of the lesser states adopted the strategy called a hedging strategy. My understanding, the hedging strategy will become more and more popular. During the later part of the Cold War, the third world countries adopted non-alliance principle. Now I think the hedging principle will become prevailing. The hedging principle not only adopted by these developing countries or small countries, and they take a side with China on issue A, and meanwhile taking side with with the U.S. on the issue B, and even Japan, France, Germany, UK. These big powers, they will do the same. UK is a very, very loyal ally of the United States, and almost follow Americans' all international security policy on what in terms of war. But you find that UK this time takes side with China on AIIB. There's a banking system, establish a new bank, and also on the 5G, the UK is not that much to follow Americans' policy. They still continue the cooperation with Huawei. So Germany certainly is a very determined for cooperation with Huawei. So what I mean that this kind of economic impact on the lesser states will be very, very different from what we familiar with the situation in Cold War. During the Cold War, there's no trade war. Why? There's no trade, no substantial trade between China, US and the Soviet Union. Why these two countries do not have this kind of impact, economic impact on other countries? Because these two countries cannot compete during the Cold War. US and Soviet do not compete like China and US in the same way. So the strategy different and the situation different. That means during the developing countries or the lesser states, they also adopt their policy according to new situation, rather than repeat what the third world countries did and during the Cold War. This economic impact. How about the impact on political relations or political order? Well, after the Cold War, we have to say the world political order mainly guided by liberalism. Liberalism became the dominating ideology of the world and transferred a lot of country and into the democracy. And also a lot of international norms and based on the liberalism. For instance, the human security, right? This is a new concept, not national security, and talking about individuals' human security. And then we have a humanitarian intervention. All of the new concept based on liberalism. Well, we have a new political order. But now we find that, hey, this situation is changing. And that kind of political order can no longer continue. First, I think the most important thing is that the liberalism no longer that dominating as before. This is not because of China's rise. It's not because China provided a new ideology to challenging Americans' liberalism. No. It's not like during the Cold War, Soviet Union provided the communist ideology, competed with America's capitalist ideology. No. China didn't change Americans' liberalism. Who challenged Americans' liberalism? It's an anti-establishment in US. It's a populism in Europe. There's a domestic challenge to liberalism instead of the foreign challenge to the liberalism. Because the liberalism lost the traditional domination at home. So their international influence and declined accordingly. So what I mean, this change means that it becomes difficult to guide to maintaining the liberalist order. And during this moment, and I cannot see any ideology can replace the role of liberalism, can replace liberalism as a dominating ideology. That means we have all kinds of ideologies compete with each other, but no super one. So we have more competitions, ideological competitions. Well, during this competition, you find that It's American taking the leadership, or not American, I should say, the current American government taking the leadership to challenge liberalist order. When American government to challenge the liberalist order, you can imagine that. Who has the capability to maintain the liberalist order established by the U.S.? I cannot see any country or a group country have that capability to maintain the order, as long as the U.S. itself to challenge a liberalist order. So when American president talking about human rights, sovereignty, how to protect American sovereignty at the UN conference, my understanding, the sovereign norms will get more attention, will get more priority from the governments. So not very long, and then we heard the Macron, the French president, he talking about the UN should give the priority to concern how to protect the Europe's sovereignty. Now, Macron is the multilateralism suggested. This liberalism generated from the French. They are so proud of that, and French for a long time, especially after Cold War, they are strong supporter or advocate of liberalism. And they mocked at China and for stressing the sovereignty or the concept of sovereignty. They say the concept is out of date. The French are advocating global governance. They said we should ignore the sovereignty. Even France now talking about the importance of sovereignty, how to protect their sovereignty. And when U.S. is talking about how to protect American sovereignty, when the Europe are talking about European sovereignty, you can imagine. How about the other countries? And the other country may not have that kind of enthusiasm to give up the sovereignty, like U.S. and the European countries during the post-Cold War period. Now I think that all of the other countries just say, hey, look at that. And that means we're right, they're wrong. They corrected themselves. They re-emphasize the importance of the sovereignty. And so when the countries, nations, and give sovereignty more legitimacy, give more emphasis on sovereignty, the international norm of the sovereignty will gain a momentum or resume its influence. Yes. Well, then, from understanding this kind of political change and brings about the identity politics. And you find that when people emphasize the sovereignty based on what? Sovereignty based on nationalism, right? Based on nationalism, they will have to say, who are we? What's our nation? Are you belong to our nation or not? You're a foreigner. You're an alien. So these kind of conflicts will become more and more. So from my understanding, the impact on the ideology will bring more separatism. Most separatism will gain momentum, not only in developing countries, and also in developed countries. So very recently, we have the case in Spain, and Catalonia, right? The Catalonia situation is very serious, certainly. And for us, in my view, the situation in Hong Kong is also a kind of separatism. So you see, the separatism will getting more and more popular. And the separatism will cause a lot of internal conflicts. Whether the separatism will spill over the border, becomes international problems or conflicts, that depends on how much foreign support. If foreign countries involved in the separatist movement or separatist conflicts, and then the separatism and separatist problem will turn into international conflicts. That's what we're going to see. And the final political impact, this is related to our age of the digital world. Digital age changed the culture, not only in some country, I think in most of the developed country, or maybe the whole world. You find that the parents and grandparents have more and more difficulty to shape their children's ideology. They have a different world outlook from you. Well, I really think those people and so concerned about advance its ideology abroad, and give concern whether he can shape his children or grandchildren. If you cannot shape your children's idea, how can you expect you shape foreigners' idea? Well, I doubt. This gap, generation gap, becomes bigger and bigger. My understanding, for Chinese millennials and the Z generation, they have very similar ideology like American millennials and Z generation. They may have different views. Their ideology is diversified, but they have a common character. What the common character or what a common idea they shared with each other is that we don't like my parents' ideology. The gap between their technology with their parents, with the government, is much bigger than those between themselves. So you find that nowadays, the ideological conflicts between China and the US, mainly at a governmental level, not a social level. What do I mean? I mean that ideology-driven policy already lost the support from the young generation. Young generation's ideology shaped by the internet. The people get the knowledge from internet rather than from their parents. So they, generally speaking, the young people regard their parents as a dinosaur. They think they're out of date. They don't know how to handle the world. They don't know how to deal with the future. They don't know. That's why the young people in every country, they complain. The government do not invest in the future. They invest in the history. Well, people of my age, I think we should invest in history because we're aged, right? We need governments to take care of us. We no longer have that capability to compete with the young generation. If the government do not side with us, how can we compete with the young? If the government side at the young people's side, well, the old people have no way to survive. Well, the competition becomes serious. My understanding that when the young people, when the young generation is so indifferent toward the ideology, I doubt China and the US ideological conflicts will become a major issue for the world. Because young people take no care of it. They never care about it. They don't want to listen to it. They don't support it. Okay, I come to the conclusion. Oh, before I do that, I want to give you a case to illustrate this argument. You find that the ideology may still play a very important role domestically, but less and less influential on international issues. The 5G is a typical case. Pompeo traveled so many traditional allies, and he visited them and encouraged them to take a united stance against Huawei. Then what? He can only get support from Canada, Australia, Japan, mainly, maybe Norwegian. Then how about this? Most of the Western countries? Well, how about most of the democracies? Germany, France, UK, India, all of this major democracy, they said, no, we do not decide our foreign policy on this issue according to ideology. My understanding that ideology can no longer use to unite the country with a shared ideology. No matter liberalism, socialism, or any ism, the function becomes weaker and weaker. I do not deny the shared ideology sometimes on some issue may make these countries cooperate each other, but not that much like the Cold War, even lesser than the role during the post-Cold War period. And another case illustrates this. And the Australian federal government strongly, I don't think any country except Canada, no country so strongly supported Americans' strategy to contain Chinese Huawei than Australia. Australian government is the strongest supporter. And then how about the local government in Australia? The local government of Westphalia said, wait a minute, now you said that because of Huawei's technology related to national security. So the government said, it had nothing to do with us. Our software has nothing to do with the national security. That's a local issue. That's our local security. We think it's safe to use Huawei's technology for our local security. So see, the local government ignored the Australian federal government's decision. My understanding, this situation is not new. And you will see more and more countries have that. The federal government, the ideology-driven policy cannot get fully support from the whole nation. And so yesterday and the last 2 days, we discussed about the report, Indo-Pacific strategy or Indo-Pacific vision. Among this grand strategy adopted by the current American president government, and heavily emphasize the 3 pillars. Among the 3 pillars, most important one is value. It's a value-driven strategy. I make a prediction here. I will say the value-driven ideology, strategy can be implemented with many, many difficulties, because it can hardly get the national support. Not internationally, I mean domestically, it's very difficult, because the young people don't think it's necessary to waste the national resources to advance a kind of ideology. They think this is unnecessary. And the young generation, they become so more familiar and comfortable with what? With a diversified ideology. Because they believe that he's right. No one is right than him. So he said, I'm right. All of the rest, all over the world are wrong. They never support any other's ideology. Finally, my conclusion is that bipolarization seems to me is inevitable. It's the trend. And it will continue. But this new bipolar world will be different from that we familiar during the Cold War. So you find many, many scholars have read articles to define today's competition between China and the US as a different one from the Cold War. So most people agree, now we are not going to have a new Cold War. But unfortunately, people do not have agreement what kind of world we are going to have. We know what it is not, but we don't know what it is. So I published an article on the foreign affairs. I gave the title, I used the term, an easy peace to describe the situation. Seems to me it cannot become popular. That means people have their own idea about the word or characterize the word. Here, I will see what kind of a bipolar we are going to have. I think we are going to have a dual political politics. No, there should be the duopoly, right? Or two hierarchies. And duopoly politics means that you have 2 companies like Airbus and the Boeing, compete with each other, and the other countries will take advantage of this competition. And for what? For their own benefits. And meanwhile, you find the two companies never cooperate with each other. There's two companies, and especially do not have any cooperation on technology research, right? Because that's the base of their survival. So this is a kind of a new world. So it's a really need China and the US and even the rest of the world have to adapt themselves to the new situation we're really not familiar with. Second is that the core area of the competition will be the cyber world, including the digital area. The digital economy is not only means cyber, it's also related to what? To manufacturing industry. And we have AI machines. And so this competition will be the core area instead of geopolitics. I remember that, and the National Security Report published in December 2007 emphasized that now we turn back, geopolitics turn back. Well, that's my view. I think this judgment is a little bit far from the reality. It's not geopolitics. It's a digital or cyber duopoly politics. This is different. And that means your relationship with neighbors are still important, but not that important as before. And the country far from you, but if that country really advanced in cyber technology, that country is much more important than your neighbors. And your relationship with that country and is more important and for your national security and your national wealth. The last point is that who will win the competition? My answer is that I don't know. I cannot make the prediction who is going to win. The reason is that the competition is so new. Neither China and the US have the knowledge, know how to do it. And they even cannot learn from the history. You cannot borrow any idea from the history. You need invention. You need to invent new ideas. You need to invent a new strategy. You need to invent a lot of things, certainly including technology invention. So if invention is the key factor, that depends on what? Depends on which government can provide a better environment or social environment for invention in that country. So according to my theory, the leadership theory, I will more realism argue that the competition between the major powers is a competition between the leadership. Between the leadership for what? To see who has a stronger capability of reform. Reform capability decided the country's future. Okay. The differences between the reform capability decided the result of the competition. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Yan. So I just have a question that I would like to ask because it's been on the tip of my tongue for the past several days. Once we do that, I'll open up the floor for questions. I'll ask that you please wait until the microphone comes to you and that you also introduce yourself so that everybody knows who you are. And also, please be respectful of time by phrasing your question in the form of a question and keeping your comments brief and to the point. But before I open up the floor for questions, I wanted to, I was waiting for your entire presentation for you to mention reform. And then you finally did in the last couple sentences. Yeah. And because that was a question that I in reading your earlier work, it's something that has come up, especially in your discussions of moral realism. And what I wanted to ask you is if you could kind of more precisely specify or define what you mean by realism? Because as I understood, it wasn't clear to me, not realism, I'm sorry, reform.
Okay.
Because as I read it, it was hard for me not to think of it as something that was essentially or approaching some sort of tautological, it was explaining what it is that it was set up to explain. And so I wanted to see if you could possibly unpack that a little bit.
Okay. Well, when we're talking about reform, first, and it refers a change. That means change the current policy or current existing strategy. Change. What direction? That reform is a positive term. It has a positive connotation. That means the change towards a positive, progressive direction. It doesn't not only mean change, because change also including and step back, including retrogress. So actually, I found that the history do not always develop unilinearly, not linearly, progressively. Sometimes the history and the setback. Sometimes we saw, okay, we come back to a darker period. And now people worry about the world turn back to Cold War. Is that, okay, if we go back to Cold War, that do not mean we're moving forward. That means we set back, right? So reform means you moving forward instead of step back. So if any government, they adopt a policy, you say, wait a minute, this policy is so familiar to us, we already experienced it before. It's very possibly, this is not reform. This is retrogress. This is a change toward the wrong direction. So this is purely based on my personal experience from the PRC. And we changed, this country changed many times. And in early 1950s, and the whole nation feel, oh, we get rid of the national government and have a communist regime, the society totally changed. And then we find that there's no drug dealer, no prostitutes. Hey, everything becomes so desirable. We regarded this as kind of a reform. And later on, we found that, hey, wait a minute, something happened. And then we have commune leap forward and then lead to the disaster. There's no food. No one said this is reform. This is a disaster. This is retrogress. And after we adjust the policy and resumed the normal productivity, then we have Cultural Revolution. Then we make a big step upward. This is a big change, but they change toward the wrong direction. And the people suddenly say, hey, wait a minute. In Qing Dynasty, we once controlled the speech. And we have a 清风不识字，什么？河谷乱翻书。Well, the guy wrote, why the wind, you do not, you're illiterate, why you turn the page of the book? And then the poem was executed, was arrested because wrote the poem. So this happened during Cultural Revolution. We're so familiar in history many, many times. No one regarded the reform, the retrogress. So you see, after the 1975, we changed, and then we found that all of this change in a positive direction. And I tell you how positive it is to make everyone feel he has a bright future. My understanding, the important thing for reform is that make the young generation have hope. If you give me time, I will illustrate how hopeless I was during the Cultural Revolution. I was sent to work on the farm. At that time, you cannot ever imagine that how much we expect the war. We really want a war to occur between China and Soviet Union. We want to go to the war. We prefer to die during the war because you live on the farm, no difference from death. Hopeless. You cannot see any hope in your life. So we say, if I go to the war, I may become a hero. That's by chance. Then I gain power and I have bright future. Or dies no different from the live on the farm forever. So here, from my generation, the reform, if we make the judgment about whether the policy change is reform, you see how much the young people support them. If you get a policy and do not get support of young people, well, I doubt that's a reform. And in 1980s, and the young people
suddenly like me will have the chance to go to the university to study. And so many young people working on the farm have the chance back to city to get a new job. And so many young people suddenly find that, hey, they can open their own business. All of the young generation find a great future for them. So that's the most wonderful experience in my life. And so I will say, and today in China, most people like me, we judge the government policy change in that way. Whether this policy gets support from the young people. Just now I said, because I'm age, so selfish, I hope the government adopt policy have a bias toward the age. But then we know, if the policy do not make the young people have hope, this is not good policy. Josh.
Thank you. Hello? Is this on? Yeah, we got it. All right. Well, thank you very much, Professor Yan. My name is Joshua Eisenman. I'm an alumnus of SAIS, and I'm a professor at Notre Dame University. You and I met many years ago. I don't think you remember. You've met many friends
Sorry.
over the years. So a couple of questions, both short. One, you've been talking about a bipolar system, but when I read Chinese work, I see a lot about multipolarity.
Yes.
And so I'm curious, the first of the two questions is this your thinking, or is this a broad change that you're seeing in Beijing, that we're now moving towards away from multipolarity into a bipolar world? And what is that broader change, if it is happening in Beijing in a broader sense, what does that mean for Chinese policy? And the second question is, we haven't discussed domestic politics in either of our two countries. And we know domestic politics obviously has a role, and so as foreigners sitting here in Washington, we've watched the evolution of the party under Xi Jinping. We've seen intra-party democracy somewhat degraded and an increase in a core leader a kind of approach. And so how should we in the United States and foreigners understand the evolution in China's political system? Is this a movement to the left? Is it a movement to the right? Is it Chinese communism? Is it Chinese National Socialism? How should we understand, watching, what is happening in China? And then finally, what does that mean for us in China's foreign policy? How does this domestic evolution impact all of the things you were talking about? So just those two easy questions.
Oh. Well, that's really very, very difficult. Not that easy, especially the second one. I really want to deal with the easy one, the bipolarization in the domestic political system. Well, actually, you are very familiar with the concept of political correctness. And actually, currently, domestically in China, political correctness requires the government talking about the multipolarization. And because of multipolarization means that you said that, okay, we're still a developing country. Second, you said, okay, we are not so special from others, and French, Indian, and you can be regarded yourself as a pole, right? So we are equal. So political correctness it's a very difficult to publicly and to talking about bipolarization. So I'm minority in China. Okay. Second, internationally correctness also require China to talking multipolarization rather than bipolarization. Because Indian doesn't like the term multipolarization, bipolar. They say, hey, bipolar, what do you mean? We have no chance. And all of the European major powers say, no, why bipolar? Well, how about the EU? And the EU should be a polar. So no one likes this term. Even the US, you say, wait a minute, bipolar means that we're equal. And we're superpower, you're not. So we prefer the unipolar rather than. So bipolar cannot be appreciated by anyone. So from my understanding, Chinese government is very smart. Since no one like it, no matter it's truth or it's a lie, well, we just say something politically correct. Okay, so I don't think it will change. And that's one thing. Second, about how the domestic change have impact on China's foreign policy. I think the domestic change have the very strong impact on China's foreign policy. And first, I published an article talking about the transition of the foreign policy from the keeping a low profile to striving for achievements. This is mainly driven by domestic change, right? After we have a new government. And also you find that after the 19th Party Congress, the government talking about the Chinese model, not only domestically, but also and talk to the foreigners and talking about the Chinese model. But now you find that we're talking less and less. Domestically, they still emphasize, oh, socialist system is perfect. Socialism is the foundation for our achievements. But internationally, they do not talk about that. We're talking about the Chinese characteristic of China. That means this is very special for China. The base for Chinese model is the leadership of Chinese Communist Party. Well, you cannot find any Chinese Communist Party leadership in any country except China. So this is so unique. We're not so sure this model is suitable for other countries. If you think it is suitable, that's your own decision. We never say our model suits for you. So from my understanding, you find that recently, and we're talking less and less, and Chinese model at the international situation. That's also because of domestic change, and we emphasize how to develop China's ourselves. And now people talking more and more talking about whether we should and give more attention to economic development. And from my understanding, and the Chinese government gives more attention to the price rather than we're talking about the BRI projects. Because domestically, people really think this is a big issue. Maybe in this country, you didn't realize how serious. When the pork price increase, and some region, the local government has no sense of politics, they issue the pork ticket, coupon. Make people, some memory, turn back to Cultural Revolution. He said, hey, wait a minute, we turn back. So immediately, and then the central government said, hey, wait a minute, we should solve the problem. But your way to issue pork coupon is not the right way to solve the problem. You need to improve the supply instead of use a coupon and for the distribution. So you see nowadays this kind of thing also have impact on China's foreign policy making. And political system, well, I don't know. I can't, because my theory is opposite from the system determinism. My theory is leadership determinism instead of system determinism. If a system, and because system determinism is so popular in this country and in China, just these two governments are advocating for different system. China, they emphasize a socialist system is perfect, it's wonderful, it's very effective to make the country rich. In this country, they said, okay, the capitalist system is the foundation, make this country become a superpower. So all of these two countries are system determinism. But then my theory is that we'll challenge this kind of philosophy. And if a system play the fundamental role, a determinant, then we have the history and difficult to explain why the country adopt the same system cannot achieve same goal. Why Philippines cannot become the superpower? Why India cannot become a superpower? And even Germany, Japan, this is a big economy, why they cannot become as stronger as US if the system will play the same role? Same thing. For China, Soviet Union adopt the system. Why Soviet Union become superpower in 1970s, but China couldn't. And also you find that today you also find that countries adopt the same political system actually cannot make the same achievements. Their achievements based on their specific policy instead of the system. Our experience, we never change the character or the nature of our system. It's a socialist system from 1949 to now. How about history? Before 1978, the system cannot make this country rich. After 1978, and the system suddenly makes the country rich. Wait a minute. Why the same system brings us different results? Same for your country. American system, you believe the same from the first day you establish it, never change the character. But why sometimes the US becomes stronger? And today people are talking about American relative decline. If not relative decline, at least people say, wait a minute, American leadership is no longer at the peak time as the Clinton's period. And I visited Philadelphia, the Constitutional Center. Oh, I like it. There's a round building. They have all these exhibitions, photos, pictures, TVs around this building. And if any American president make a large social change, he will have a special wall, just like this, 1 meter wall. And with his photo, and with all this introduction about what he did to this country, and then there's a TV, all of the programs about what he did. If the government didn't change the country very much, and then several presidents share one wall. You can go went there. What's happened after the Cold War? All of the presidents share one wall. I ask you, can you tell me what's a fundamental social reform carried out in this country after 1992? You find that in 1960s, and you changed the apartheid system, the separation system, right? The blacks and the whites, and in early period, you change you turn from the independent appeals to the central bank, and the military states. You did a lot of reform in your history. But then, after 1991, my personal judgment, China were still not that advanced like you. Our system may not be as like you regard as good as yours. But then we changed the country. We reformed the country much more than you did yourself. And that's why my theory emphasized the leadership's capability of reform instead of the system.
Yifan?
Hi, thank you, Professor. I'm Yufan. I was a student here, so I would like to ask you a bit more about ideology. I know you talk about that how it's more for domestically and internationally. Maybe it would be less important, but I think a lot of people in DC would disagree. Is that like for a lot of debates here, they're really concerned about ideology in China. Also, they're concerned about what the government is doing to its people in Xinjiang, a lot of places. And it actually affects a lot of other policy. For example, how they see China would do with its technology, what it would do with new power. So maybe what do you want to say to these Americans in DC? Because for them, I think ideology is a big part of their judgment about China and what it will become and how they should deal with China.
Yes. Well, first, I think if we want to understand the present role of ideology in China, we need to have a clear definition about the term. My definition for ideology refers to the political ideas advocated by the government. And it's different from the political culture and refers to the ideas or the philosophy and shared by the ordinary people in the society. So when we're talking about ideology, I will say this refers to the governmental idea, governmental belief. Certainly, foreign policy will be based on governmental belief rather than based on ordinary people's political belief. So in that way, I would say in China and in the US, all of the foreign policies, even the Indo-Pacific, they concern the value or ideology as the base for their concerned strategy. So in China, at this moment, we are different from the US in that we suffered from the Cultural Revolution. One of the experience or lessons we learned from the Cultural Revolution is that you cannot use ideology to guide your foreign policy. Otherwise, you make a fundamental mistake, will hurt yourself. That's our experience. So that now you find that we in China domestically, we say Marxism is the ideology for guiding our works. But then you never heard Marxism is the ideology governing our foreign policy. So once government issued a white paper, development and the peace and the development. In that white paper, and it clearly stated, China's foreign policy was guided by three things. One is international environment, and the second is our reality, means the Chinese reality. And third is very important, is the fine Chinese tradition, culture. We didn't say that. We guide our foreign policy with the foreign ministry. Even today, this president, the government never say, and we use Marxism to guide our foreign policy. So I think the foreign policy is really different from domestic policy in terms of ideology.
Peter.
Thank you. I'm Peter Botellier. I used to teach here at this school courses on China's economy. And I totally agree with you that in the competition between China and the US, the conventional economic parameters are likely to recede into the background, and that technology competition will become more and more important.
Yeah.
Two questions. One on cooperation. You largely discounted the potential or the effect of cooperation. How do you see the incentives for cooperation in important areas such as climate control, disease control, and other factors? Are these countervailing factors that will create a different environment for the technology competition? And second question on artificial intelligence. I totally agree with you that we cannot predict who will win the technology competition, but we can define some of the factors that will determine the outcome. And one of the factors that you did not talk about specifically is artificial intelligence, because whoever is ahead in artificial intelligence will have the power to become more innovative, invent more. So the technology competition will focus in particular on artificial intelligence, in my opinion. Can you say something more about that? Is that one of the factors that will determine the outcome of the technology competition more broadly?
Okay. Well, generally speaking, I believe all cooperations between China and the US are based on the shared interests, complementary interests, or common interests, instead of based on the mutual trust. And we have, without the mutual trust, we become the largest traders with each other. So no matter we have trust or not, and as long as we have a shared common or complementary interests, we will cooperate with each other. So in terms of the economy, I think in those fields, and either side cannot sacrifice that much for decoupling strategy, and will still maintaining cooperation. For instance, and when just a few days after the White House announced the policy contain Huawei, and then they say, okay, no. Because at this moment, the rural electricity supply still rely on Huawei's products, and we will have an exemption on some products produced by Huawei. We continue this kind of cooperation. Now you find that, that's my word, that the decoupling policy will be selective rather than comprehensive. That means they, at the American side, must considering and whether they can pay the price. The cost is very high, and if you decouple the economic relationship, and if the cost is too high, they will do the calculation and the benefit and the cost, and then they will maintain those cooperation which are at cost beyond the country's capability. For Chinese side, the same. Okay, and so in that way, I will say this cooperation in the climate change will be different. And this government has already, and White House already made decision to quit from Paris agreements. I don't think China and the US can cooperate on the climate issue very much. And in the global governance, I will see there will be less and less cooperation between China and the US. And China and the US cooperation will be more and more heavily focused on the bilateral cooperation rather than multilateral cooperation. Multilateral platform is no longer a place for China and the U.S. to cooperate each other. I do not mean the no multilateral cooperation. I mean less and less, and still some sectors they will do. So, for instance, even East Asian Summit, the White House sent not sent a governmental head or the state head to attend. So that's my argument. The second about AI, my understanding, I don't think China and the U.S. will develop a lot of AI cooperation. They certainly will do some not sensitive and technology. They will continue cooperation, but some technology related to the military and the national security, they may not develop cooperation. But both sides need cooperation on the norms, because AI closely related a new social morality. This is a big issue. Both China and the U.S. will be challenged by these moral problems caused by the AI. And then they need to develop these social norms to govern the AI. Nowadays, internationally already talking about the AI air machine, the airplane and submarine, all this AI military attack, and who will responsible for that. And so this kind of the issue of morality will really will bring China and the U.S. to discuss about the cooperation, because the competition will require these two countries to develop the norms to govern the competition, like that.
So, Stephen.
Well, thank you, Professor. I'm Chang Wu. I'm second-year China Studies student here. You mentioned about young generations are like more indifferent to ideology in your speech. But according to my observation, there are some literatures indicating that the younger generation in China are more favorable to stronger nationalism. And to our observation, like some popular culture, like the movies, 厉害了我的国, or like Powerful My Country, or 战狼, War Warriors. These get very strong support in the Chinese society. Also, the medias like Global Times or some like the 观察者 observation, this kind of media, they are very nationalism oriented. And also in the Chinese government side, we recently the party conference has initiated the idea of the China's governance, 中国之治. So I'm very curious to how do we distinguish this kind of strong belief in the China model from the pure ideology? This is my question. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think perhaps I have lived in this world longer than you, so I have a different judgment about the situation. We used to use the word the more nationalism. Then my question is that more than whom? More than their parents? Definitely not. Their parents are more nationalism than their children. And I remember when I was young, and every kid is prepared to die for the country. I doubt any kids in China now say, okay, I prepare to die for my national interests. First, the young people no longer as nationalists as their parents and their grandparents. The grandparents have the experience of the later period of Qing dynasty, more nationalism than now. And they want to establish a very nation state, and the Sun Yat-sen, why Sun Yat-sen's Kuomintang is a nationalist party. That's a national party. They never talking about international interests. They said we emphasize our national interests. So that people of Chinese young people in terms of nationalism is much weaker than their parents and the grandparents. Okay, compare with the American people. Are Chinese really more nationalist than Americans? I doubt. I think the Rainbow 1, Rainbow 2 much more popular than 战狼1, 战狼2 in China, right? And so can you, because Rainbow 2 is popular, Rainbow 1, Rainbow 2 popular, you say American is people are more nationalism than their parents? No, just because young people like violence than the aged people. Right? They have the muscle. They want to show behave like hero. People my age, wow, that was, wait a minute, I cannot compete with you. I'm so weak. If I fight with you, I will be broken, my arms. So this actually what you said from my understanding. This is purely, you're influenced by the media report. It's not based on your own judgment. Because if you make your own observation, you do not only watch the TV market in China, you also have to watch the TV market in the US, in the Europe, then you will see. If you watch the TV in Japan and the Korea, you will feel what Chinese is purely not a nationalist. They have no sense of nationalism if you go to the South Korea. That's a real nationalism. South Korea, you cannot find any foreign car, almost no foreign cars in South Korea. And you said Chinese are very nationalist. Look at the street, so full of the foreign cars. Is it nationalism? I doubt it.
Song-Po.
Thank you, Professor Yan. I'm Song-Po Yang, a Tsinghua Sci student here. So you have been long advocating an alliance between China and Russia. And a couple of days ago, you have written an article self-reacting why this strategy has not been adopted by both governments. So there are reasons clearly stated in your article, such as China doesn't want the equilibrium between US and China be broken. But do you still personally believe that China and US should ally in the future?
Well, in terms of Russia,
sorry,
in terms of theory, and I still cannot find any facts to beaten my theoretical arguments. That means the country have allies and will suffer more than the country has no allies. And so no history facts can beat my theory. So my theoretical argument is that China still need to make an alliance with Russia. But this policy was rejected. Rejected is not because the making allies you cannot benefit. It's that whether it's necessary. Why? What I wrote an article. I said why even the U.S. and the White House becomes reluctant to offer the security protection for the allies. They think that anyhow the world is so peace and so peaceful. We have no danger to fight any war. If we don't fight any war, why we need allies? That's too costly. So this is a calculation of cost and benefits. The making allies, you can benefit politically and security, in terms of security, not economically. You cannot expect to have a military allies and then you benefit economically. So nowadays, people said, wait a minute, we no longer care about the security because security is guaranteed by nuclear weapons. No, ignore that. And politically, they said political is vague. And that's really a fantasy. So the money is real. Money is a real thing. This is what we want. So this kind of monetary secular concern make people feel and making alliance doesn't work. It doesn't work to making alliance. So actually, from my understanding today, I still believe if China making alliance, we have a better environment than now. Unfortunately, I was rejected not only by Chinese government and also Russian government. I have a discussion with the Russian deputy foreign minister. He asked me the same question. Yeah, why do you advocate for alliance? Our two governments already issued the joint communique said that we never make an alliance. I said, I know that. I said, why? I said just because your government and you represent the governments, you have bureaucratic thinking. I'm a scholar. I have different thinking from the government.
Greg?
My name is Greg Moore. I'm here at SAIS on sabbatical, a wonderful thing. I work in China, Ningbo University in Nottingham. I wanted to just make a point about the Huawei. In the EU recently, they passed a sort of a recommendation that EU member states don't give networks to networks controls by hostile states, and I think they're clearly referencing China there. So the EU is not quite so soy bien as about that as you portrayed it, I think. My question is about your statement about China not being a threat to liberalism. And I guess I'd like to ask you, are you sure about that? And the reason I'm asking that is because I think from outside China, not just the West or the US, I think in other parts of the world, Africa, there's illiberalism in China's domestic politics, obviously religious persecution, sort of police state surveillance, et cetera. But also in China's economic system, I think it's increasingly illiberal. And Elizabeth Economy, Barry Naughton, all those kind of folks have written a lot about the Chinese economy becoming more and more centralized, the state-run companies having more and more role. So as China's impact expands in the world, as China rises, I think it's inevitable that those norms are going to impact the world. And I think we see that already. So are you sure that it won't have an impact on liberalism? I guess that's my question.
Okay. The first about the EU's policy toward Huawei. Actually, from my understanding, and we personally, I don't think Chinese government should give a real attention or serious concern about EU's policy. EU's policy just provide an excuse for members if they want to do it. And if the EU members don't want to do anything, and forbidden by the EU, they just tell the EU, say, okay, that's your decision, it's not mine. So there you see we developed a lot of infrastructure cooperation with East European countries. And these things for the EU concern, hey, already violent the forbidden the regulation by the EU. So that's why EU cannot play like a nation states. It's certainly the European EU members like it. Whenever they don't want to do it, they just tell the Chinese government that, oh, it's not because of me, because of EU. They forbidden us from doing it. But we know that just an excuse. They use EU as the shield to protect themselves. So I don't think the EU's policy can have a very strong impact on the members' policy or decision whether they cooperate with Huawei or not. And actually, a lot of EU members already signed the contract with Huawei for this project. The second about this, the last few years, and Chinese government to centralize the economic power and make the private business feel difficult to manage their business. But then I think from the last year, the central government realized that. They start to adjust this policy. And then I think our national leaders hold a meeting, especially for private business, certainly. And we has already issued a lot of new policy in favor of the private business, still cannot regain their trust. From my understanding, you cannot regain people's trust by short term. You need a long time practice. And in my book, we discuss about the strategic credibility. And any kind of credibility, and it's a kind of a result of accumulation of a consistent policy. And if you continue the policy for years, and then it's accumulated the strategic credibility. For Joseph Nye, he called it a soft power. But then Nye cannot explain why the soft power can decline dramatically, just like diving. Why? You cannot increase the credibility immediately, but you can make the credibility drop off, just like dive. It's because if you make one thing different from the previous policy, and the opposite from the previous policy, and the credibility will be undermined dramatically. So our policy in the few years and actually make the private business suspect about the government policy toward the private business. Now we try to resume the credibility. From my understanding, it takes time, and it's if we can continue this kind of announce the policy for private business for 5 years, and then we can resume this trust from private business and 70% or something like that. For instance, and a very recent change. And once we have the policy and allow every citizens and to send 50,000 US dollars abroad. And later on, they changed the policy. And then they said, okay, you can send every year, you can send out 50,000, but every time only 10,000. So that you have to do 5 times. That means it costs you a lot of trouble and make you send less money out. Now recently, they resumed the traditional policy. You can do it at one go. So actually, you just resume the policy. So a lot of people suspect, hey, how long the policy will last? 2 years? And then you also change it back. So it takes time. From my understanding, the current government do no longer enjoy that kind of strategic credibility among your traditional allies. It's because the policy have changed from the previous government. Usually, your traditional allies believe no matter who elected as an American president, their policy toward the allies would never change. So for 70 years, you established that credibility. But now suddenly, you find that, no. Different American government, a different American president will adopt a different policy toward the allies. So even you are going to have a new president resume the traditional alliance policy, I doubt you can make your allies immediately retrust you as usual. No.
So we've got time for one last question, Mario. One last quick question.
So, Professor Yan, thank you very much for your remarks. My name is Mario Colella. I'm the editor of the China Studies Review, and I wanted to ask you a question regarding an earlier point in your presentation, talking about the role of universities within a hierarchical system. And what I wanted to ask you was, when we're talking about China-U.S. engagement, or China in the wider world, U.S. in the wider world, what do you see as the national and international responsibilities for us as scholars and us as universities?
What's the question? Can you specify that?
To make that more specific, what I mean is, it seems that within universities, we have responsibilities to our national constituencies, but also to the international scholarly community.
Okay. Well, from my understanding, first, I think it's very difficult for a university to undertake some national responsibility, because the university actually should be undertake the responsibility for knowledge or for the society. And for the society sometimes, and you cannot concern, it's a national responsibility. People's ideas are so different, interests are contradictory with each other. So from my understanding, the duty of the university is how to help the world, how to help the society to improve themselves. Rather than, okay, how respond to solve the problems is beyond the university capability to solve the practical problems. University don't have that capability, cannot play that function. And in China, I know, and we developed a concern the university have 3 functions, and also learned from some the American university. They consider the university will have 3 roles, and education, and the social responsibility, and technology invention. And they consider 3 things. Well, I doubt this social responsibility means a national responsibility. And I think we just you keep the society moving keep the society mentally and moving toward the positive direction. And the second about how about the internationally? Internationally, I think the university is really changing the world, and we change people's mind, and you find that people receive the college education behave very differently from those did not. And so in China, you find that the parents really care about their children, girlfriends or boyfriends, and whether they receive the college education. But they never care the discipline, no matter they learn the technology or the engineering students or the philosophy or the history, they do not care. But they decide you make a friend and should have the education background. The reason is that they believe those people receive the college education and they are more civilized. So the university, for internationally, we should make the world more civilized. For instance, and today I'm talking about the competition between China and the US. I don't think it's possible for human beings to avoid the conflicts between China and the US. But if we work together, it's possible we can make China and the US to compete with each other in a civil manner. So if you say what we can do, I think a university, in terms of the IR study, and we may consider how to make the major powers to compete with each other with a civil manner. That's it. And certainly we need to I think some people use the word education. I doubt university will still have this kind of function in the future, education, because the internet becomes a big educator. No university can compete with it. The young people learn from the internet, from website, and their knowledge, my understanding, more learned from the website rather than from the class. And in China, it becomes, at least in Tsinghua, becomes more and more difficult to lecture a class. You just read a term, and then the student gets a definition on the board. They don't tell the definition, we know what it is. They can Google it, or Baidu it, and then keep it there. He doesn't know, but then he just type the word, the calculator, and then he put it on. So immediately he get it, he doesn't know, but then he tell you, hey, we can learn from Baidu. You do not hear. So teacher have to teach the kids the knowledge beyond Baidu, beyond Google. That's really difficult. Okay, thank you.
But on that note, we started on a scholarly note. We're going to end on a scholarly note. Please join me in thanking again Professor Yan Xuetong.